Welcome to a very special TransMissions podcast event. We are reacting to Transformers War for Cybertron Kingdom, and we've got very special guests, FJ DeSanto and Matt Murray, showrunners and producers of the entire War for Cybertron trilogy. Thank you guys for joining us again to talk about Transformers War for Cybertron Kingdom.
Oh, we're excited to be back with you guys. This is like the tradition for this, so it's good to wrap it up with you guys. Always, you guys are. I think you guys are always the first people we talk to.
We try to be.
Oh,
every time. Like I think literally for all three, you guys are the first people who have seen it that we've talked to.
I know when I was texting you to set this up, you were like, "You were the first person that has seen Kingdom."
I started grilling him. He's probably sitting there like, leave me alone.
I was walking my dog.
What'd you think of this? Did it work?
Well, this is going up after Kingdom has been released on Netflix. So hopefully everyone watching this, if you haven't watched it yet, go, spend a couple of hours and watch all 6 episodes, because we're going to spoil the whole thing. This is going to be, spoiler-filled deep dive show all about, asking about the behind the scenes and just details about the show and some of the plot motivations, all that good stuff. So fair warning, if you haven't watched it, this is going to spoil everything. So hit stop on YouTube, go watch it, and then come back and we'll talk about it. So without further ado, let's get right in. So yeah, I mean, overall, I was really happy with Kingdom, happy with the entire trilogy, really, and this one was very much, of course, a Beast Wars focused series, and I'm a fan of Beast Wars 2 as well as G1. So I thought this was a really cool way to bring both of those things together. And I was surprised at how much of Transformers the movie you guys rolled in there too. So you took the nexus of chocolate, strawberry, and vanilla all mixed together there. The G1, the 86 movie, and Beast Wars. So that. Was that your intention all from the beginning, is to merge all three of those things together?
Yeah, that's the one thing I can say we didn't, sort of bullshit our way through. That was, well, you could see in, the Dead Universe episode in Earthrise with Galvatron and the disc, we'd always sort of set it up, and the golden disc as a MacGuffin was always talked about, because Matt can speak on Beast Wars better than I can. I had to sort of get a much deeper education into it than, say, G1. But, we always knew Galvatron was going to be a big part of it. That was always a big thing, because we knew Galvatron was going to be in the Kingdom toy line. And, when Hasbro tells you these things, there's no story logic to it. It's just, hey, we're going to do a Galvatron toy. So, it's on us, meaning Matt and I, the writers, et cetera, to sort of figure it out. But we did sort of have a framework from the beginning that the Kingdom season would center around the golden disc, because it was such a cool thing that was never explored. And the beauty of, of the original Beast Wars is there's so much stuff that's not explained in it that allowed us the opportunity to sort of take advantage of story-wise and sort of flesh out and, what is the golden disc and what's on it and all that stuff and how does it tie into all this stuff. And, and from that emerged a new sort of narrative of, Unicron with Galvatron and Nemesis as sort of his minions, lackeys, whatever, heralds. The Nemesis thing, Matt, I don't remember. The Nemesis thing evolved as we kept going.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Nemesis wasn't always the plan. Galvatron always was. But then when we realized there was an opportunity of, and hopefully this comes across in the show, the sort of quote unquote revised history is the Beast Wars characters come from a future where the Allspark never came back. I think they actually even say that. So the twist was, you imagine, especially when you see the state of Cybertron in the 6th episode, is Cybertron dies and eventually in some form of evolution, the Maximals and Predacons emerge, know a little bit about the history, and you have Beast Wars Megatron who's sort of like, like obsessed with history names himself after this and sort of is the one who figures it out. But their universe is sort of has a bigger evil presence of Unicron, Nemesis, and Galvatron. And that's sort of like, even though the Maximals and Predacons hate each other, there's still like something above them oppressing the planet. What that is and how much detail, we sort of didn't get too deep into, other than we had that, sort of brief flashback in the beginning when he steals the disc. But it was always the idea, so I'm doing the long-winded version, that the Maximals and Predacons and that future was the direct result of Prime throwing the Allspark into the space bridge and the ramifications of that. So the idea was you're confronted by your future. You know what I mean? Like you're confronted by the future you created, whether that was the Maximals, Predacons, Nemesis, Galvatron, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like how you explained it to me when we were chatting, like referencing the 2009 Star Trek and how they handled the time travel, and like basically like what's in popular culture now with things like Loki, the branching timelines and stuff.
Sure.
And essentially, that's how this time travel seems to work.
Well, that's the idea, because this was always War for Cybertron. And I'm being honest, and somebody at Hasbro will kill me for this, but the idea was when the trilogy was presented to us, it was always, hey, it's a prequel to G1. It's like, okay, it's a prequel to G1, but that's fine in Siege and Earthrise, right? But then when you get to Kingdom, you inherently contradict G1 by having the Beast Wars characters show up in some capacity and interact with them. And you didn't want to do the cheap 1960s sci-fi where it's like they have this adventure and then their memories erase and they have amnesia, and then it goes back to G1, like something stupid like that. It had to be something more permanent, more, definitive. And that Star Trek, the 2009 Star Trek, and I'm saying this as a diehard Trekkie, old original series Trekkie, what was great about that movie was, hey, if you watched this franchise for 40 years, all that happened. But this thing happened, which is a very Star Trek conceit, time travel and messing with it. They did that a million times in the show, except this put everything in this direction, and you have Nimoy and Zach Quinto interacting, which was really cool. And that was the idea of like, we got to a point where it was like, oh my God, Galvatron and Megatron interacting. And that led to, oh, well, if we're going to have those two, we should have the parallels and have Nemesis and Optimus. And that sort of evolved naturally where we seeded that in the second season with that one shot of Nemesis. And then the idea was in that, fifth episode in the Dead Universe was you were seeing all those different potential futures, Dead Optimus, Nemesis, Galvatron, all these different things, from the past to the potential futures. And at some point, and I'm sure you'll eventually talk to the writers, all of them, and someone will remember better than I will, that Nemesis sort of evolved in that there had to be the parallel with the two key characters meeting their future selves.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was also great that like when the Beast Wars characters mentioned, like they had like a complement of like 200 plus, and now they're down to these 6. So if you want to, you can say, okay, the Beast Wars show still happened. And,
yeah, well, that was
up until they run into the arc.
Yeah, well, the idea is, when one of the writers, Tim Sheridan and May Catt wrote this. And May, in particular, she was on Cyberverse. And I met May really early on. And the first thing May had said to me, without knowing anything about the trilogy, was, are you doing anything with Beast Wars? It's my favorite thing ever. And I said, if you wait 6 months, I'll answer that question. And she said, okay. And then when we're getting Kingdom, so, we had Brandon and Gavin in the way we sort of did it was we sort of would keep one writer and sort of ship somebody out, which sounds really awful. It didn't mean it that way, to sort of keep it going. So it was Gavin and Brandon in the first one, and then Gavin and Tim in the second one, and then Tim and May in the third one. And Gavin went and did another show for Matt and I that's coming out next year. But the idea was how do we play to the strengths of these guys? Like Brandon, really G1 oriented guy, right? Like really knew that stuff, had great ideas for it. Gavin knows all that shit, and he was coming off of Cyberverse. So, and we tread similar story territory, so it was easy to, that was really helpful. And then, Tim came in, and then Tim had a real affinity for Galvatron, and particularly show up with the old Galvatron toys in the office and stuff like that. But May really, the reason I bring this up is May really set the tone with the first episode of Kingdom. And the one thing we sort of came up with was like sort of a twist of the Maximals and the Autobots wouldn't necessarily trust each other in the beginning. Because you want the excuse of, like, you naturally expect like the old school Marvel team up, right? Like everybody's going to fight and then team up, right? But instead, we just thought it would be cooler if Beast Wars Megatron meets his hero and he bows immediately and here's the disc. And it's almost like I was proven right. I told you guys. It's like sort of telling Dinobot, like, I told you he would show up. Here's the disc, dude. But there's also the ulterior motive that you learn later is Beast Wars Megatron is trying to help Megatron not become Galvatron to protect their own future. You know what I mean? So to avoid all that stuff. So, I give May and Tim a lot of credit to make all that, especially that Trek 2009-esque element to it, that they made it relatively clean. Like, that was the big surprise when we were sort of in post on it and watching it, on the big screen and sort of going, oh, this actually makes sense. Like, it's not convoluted. It's not, like the time travel aspect of it is clear, but we had to create this sort of new, not necessarily new, but sort of fleshed out idea of this future is the future where the Allspark doesn't come back, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But I give all credit, like May would know how these characters acted and spoke in the beginning, but also coming up with that sort of, even those little things, like you said, that, well, we had a complement of 200 people, 200 soldiers or warriors or whatever, and we're down to these things. To be honest, that was mostly because we wanted to focus on the core characters,
right,
and deliver on both sides.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
It definitely gives their struggle weight, though, and in terms of the characters, I mean, she got the mannerisms of a lot of them, just like Rat Trap acted like Rat Trap. That, I mean, I thought out of all of them, he was like the most perfect in terms of how he acted.
No, that's great. That's great. That's Tadaro doing the voice, because we knew. Me as a New Yorker, I just said to Matt, I said, we got to get Tadaro to do this. And he thought I was joking. And he was like, hey, yo, you want me to do the voice? And I was like, no, like Frank, like, I really want you to do it. And then, they sort of went in and figured out how to do it in a way.
Yeah.
But I feel like, the other thing is, as much as I like those original shows, we wanted to spotlight them all in a way that they fit into this show. Because what I really like, the big surprise, and really it's a compliment to Tim, May, and the studio, the animation studio, Polygon, and our director, is the Maximals really come across like a family, mm-hmm. more than the Autobots. Like, in my mind, the Autobots are going to learn something from these guys, that they're so used to being a military unit over these 3 seasons that, like, I always like the bit where they're worried about Air Razor. Like, we got to go get her. We got to, like, I enjoy their motivations are more personal than the Autobots. And then with the Predacons, it's sort of a little more ragtaggy, and they're sort of at their wits' end. But Beast Wars Megatron is sort of proven right. Like, I went here, we got to this place, and my hero showed up. And what kind of trouble can we cause now? But, we tried to give them depth, obviously without trying to insult any of the core elements of the characters.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask a quick question. Like, how much of the plan, like, in the story was Megatron's was his fault, if that's the right word for it? Like, how much of that was his plan, and how much of that was just something that kind of just happened by happenstance?
Matt,
sorry, what do you mean specifically, like his plan?
So, all right. So in the story, Megatron goes back in time, and ends up, on the prehistoric Earth.
Oh, you're talking about Beast Wars Megatron.
Yes.
Sorry, I got confused.
Okay.
Oh, no worries. So, like, how much of that was intentional for him, or like how much of it was like how much does he know? How much does he control this? I mean, he does feel different than the classic quote unquote Beast Wars Megatron. So, like, how much of that was like his plan? How much of that was like scripted for him?
I mean, I don't. After, you might have to correct me on this, but like, I think the intention was that this Beast Wars Megatron wasn't able to decode the golden disc very much. He got a little snippets here and there, and could sort of like, fill in the gaps with what he had learned from what little history there was of, the pre-war and stuff like that. So he sort of had an idea of what he was trying to do, and he obviously set off with the best of intentions to, steal the golden disc and try to, in his mind, right the wrongs of the history. But I think in my mind, as soon as they show up on Earth and then they start interacting with the G1 characters, all bets are off. Like at a certain point, the golden disc just becomes null and void because they start going off the path of that history. And that's why things kind of don't necessarily go the way that he was probably hoping they went. So I think a lot of that is because, again, we're messing with, time travel and timey-wimey stuff here. But like, as soon as that, and I'm going to use the Loki terms here because now they're in, the public lexicon. But, as soon as that divergent timeline happened with the Allspark leaving, all bets are off. Like you can sit there and you can try to go, well, this is how it happened one way. And it goes, well, it's not going to happen this way this time. So I think, he set out with a very specific plan in mind and then, had to improvise as he went along.
The other thing, Mike, is I don't know if this answers your question about how much Megatron was planning, but there's a line in the very last episode where Galvatron says, "Why do you think we let that idiot get the golden disc?" Which is obviously, and you see him get all pissed off. And we had originally, and it's just more for time than anything, we were going to have a bit where you saw Galvatron give Beast Wars Megatron the golden disc in the future. But then it would be too on the nose. Like you'd lose the mystery of it and the idea of the Heralds of Unicron sort of terrorizing everybody, would go out the door if Galvatron and Beast Wars Megatron got along. So he's slightly manipulated with the golden disc. Like he sort of nudged, like,
Right, and in the end, you didn't need to like hit it that close to home for it too. I mean, I think we all like kind of gathered that it was at least he was at least Galvatron is partially responsible for it, if not wholly responsible for it.
Yeah, it's definitely, the Galvatron Nemesis thing, and it's one of those things. If we had 10 episodes, my life would have been a lot easier. But the idea was always, that evolved as it kept going, in terms of that extra sort of subplot of
how much of Galvatron and Nemesis's backstory did you flesh out? Because I mean, Galvatron, of course, I mean we can extrapolate from Transformers the movie. He was turned into Galvatron. He doesn't want to work for Unicron. He sees. I mean, that was clear from the '86 movie. He sees himself as a slave, to this giant being that he wants to destroy. And of course, he's manipulating everything to try and get out from under that control. But with Nemesis Prime, that's kind of a completely new element. I really want to know what that backstory is, because I mean, if we're talking about Transformers the movie, Prime died, and then at some point, Unicron got Prime's dead body and reanimated him and made him a herald, and kind of turned him into something, the thing that he hates the most, which is a really interesting thing. I'd really like to see Prime's journey from Optimus to Nemesis.
There's a snippet in the scene where Starscream listens to the disc, which originally, I can say these things now, we were going to sort of lift the dialogue from the '86 movie of him becoming Galvatron, like lift it. But there were copyright concerns with that. I'm being frank about it. Matt, tell me if I'm wrong about that.
No,
so
what
we ended up doing was creating a sort of new fiction where Prime is, you hear Prime being killed, or he's like Megatron's narrating like Optimus is dead. So like that to me is not 86 movie. That's some other post G1 adventure that they all are involved in. And and the key to the whole thing was that and again, this is not on screen, but this was sort of the backstory we discussed, and the writers might have different recollections or more fleshed out recollection. To me, the simple thing was Nemesis is the symbol of the Optimus who fails to bring the Allspark back, right? Mm. So he failed the planet. Alita's dead, and that's the key. Like Alita, we kept her dead, as you can see, except the little spark ghost shit at the end. But the idea was always that was the symbol of failure. Like he gave up, and that's why when Prime says, "Who did this to you?" Like he's sort of like, yeah, that's what happened. Like, because the idea is, it's not necessarily like, oh, I'm the evil Optimus. The idea of Nemesis in this is representing the failures of Optimus Prime. Should they not complete this mission? Should they not rectify the mistakes made in Siege or the things that they did in Siege? That's the key. So, and also, which was, it doesn't come across as strongly as if we had more time with these things. But the idea was that you could see Optimus and Megatron in some capacity could work together in some way, shape, or form. Or, that was the irony of those two guys in the future, even though they're corrupted and evil. That the one thing, like, they're sitting there, like, now at this point, they're sort of like, forget the planet, fuck it. Like, we don't care. We just want to kill Unicron so we're free. You know what I mean? Like, and even Megatron can't deal with that. Like, Megatron still has that when we get to the end, when he has to make a choice. It's still, and the idea was everybody else figured this out before Megatron did. So when they all show up at the end in the 6th episode, Maximals, Predacons, Autobots, Decepticons, the idea is Primal's really the one who unifies them off screen. Like he says, I got a bad idea. He lets everybody out and unifies them. And also, I would imagine Starscream now, he's seen all this crazy shit and he's nuts. And that sort of was the idea, was like Starscream is sort of now this wild card, wilder than wild card in the whole thing. And again, that's always Tadaro being able to deliver something grounded with and realistic and dramatic with what could easily be a mustache twirly parody. And that's the advantage of these actors, especially Jason and Frank and Jake, and especially Lindsay as Alita. That end scene with Alita is just, like the payoff for the whole thing. But also that moment is where Prime becomes Prime. You know what I mean? Like when she said you did everything you could, like that moment is where he comes full circle. And that's why the idea of, I'm rambling on again, like I always fucking do, but you get the idea that the plan was not to become these guys. You don't get to tell us what to do. We make our own choices. And even Megatron says that I'd rather become a herald of Unicron than, deal with you, asshole, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is kind of sad. Like as I was like rewatching it today and after like Endgame and everything, I'm like, it's kind of sad Optimus and Alita didn't have their, moment dancing to sad music at the end of the movie.
It becomes that thing where it's like, everybody just, what I really liked is that she's in the trailer, for the show. So everybody's just, are you bringing her back? Like everybody, the funny thing is we kill her in the 2nd season. And to be quite honest, we killed her because Hasbro was basically like, you can do whatever you want with her. We're not going to make a toy out of her. And of course, then they made a toy out of her. And I kept saying, no, we're going to make her really cool. We're going to make her really, really cool. These are all the things I'm not allowed to talk about. But, and they were like, then they saw like the scripts and they were like, she's going to be really cool. We're going to make a toy out of her. And I'm, okay, guys. And, but there could have, we could have done, again, like I was talking about with like the cheap old 50s and 60s sci-fi, we're like, oh, they have amnesia. They don't remember meeting the Beast Wars characters. Nobody remembers each other, which was, the cheap and easy way to go, which we didn't want to do. There's a cheap and easy way to bring back everybody who died, Magnus and Alita and all that shit.
Right.
It's like, then the deaths don't mean anything, especially Alita. The idea is like, whatever Alita's sacrifice is what galvanizes Prime. When he finds that body and B is behind him, and we wanted that. There's a price to the war, because look, it's Transformers. No matter what, it's not like they're not going to bring the Allspark back. Like no one's watching this show thinking, yeah, they're going to not get the Allspark back. Planet's going to die, and that's the end of the series, right? Like Transformers, R.I.P. The Allspark's coming back. So you had to have some risk with a payoff where there's no reward, and that's the death of Alita in particular. And you cheapen it if you bring her back, in some physical way, like, oh, the planet comes alive and everybody lives. And it's like, dude, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you also did that with Dinobot. I mean, and this was a focus on Beast Wars. I get the sense that someone rewatched Code of Hero, and I really felt how you did a good homage to that in the couple of episodes focusing on Dinobot and the choices he made, but having him still be a Predacon at the beginning of this series, and then not quite become a Maximal, but become an independent bot and make his own choices. I thought it was really, really interesting.
Yeah, I'm going to let Matt answer that one and sort of take you through the process of that, because he's the Beast Wars guy when it comes to this stuff.
Well, and again, I hate to reference Loki, but I know it's top of everyone's mind right now. But like, again, these are variants. You know what I mean? Like, so we had to really sit there in the writer's room and go, okay, like, what are the core tenets of all these characters, and what specific things need to happen to make them still feel like those characters. They're not exactly those characters, but they are variants of those characters. And, for me as a kid, obviously, Dinobot and that whole arc that he went through in the original series, like, that still sticks in my mind like, very vividly. So that stuff was very important, that we have a version of that still felt true to the original series. And, I think we were able to hopefully do that justice.
Yeah. I was saying that it was very kind of poignant and compressed, or like the whole story was compressed, and thought it was done really well.
Yeah, the thing is, I don't remember how that came about. I guarantee that's May and Tim somewhere figuring that part out, because I don't remember sort of being like, we got to do the Dinobot arc. But what I like about that, especially his sort of moment where he dies and he's dealing with Primal, is it's much less faction-y, the Maximals and the Predacons, than the Autobots and the Decepticons, which is a very clean sort of ideology. You know what I mean? Like, whereas like the Predacons are a gang of thieves, or at least Beast Wars Megatron is to me. Like, we stole this thing, we were doing this, and I feel like they weren't, their battle on their Cybertron was not as significant or insane as the Autobots, Decepticons when we meet them in Siege. They're rivals, but it's more like street gangs versus armies, if that makes sense. So it's a little more personal, and they might know each other a little more personally. That's why I really like the scene of Dinobot when he dies saying to Primal, would I have been a cool, would I have made a good Maximal? And they sort of banter with each other, and that was the big joy for me with this, was the writers and the, everybody with this, the writers and the director and the actors really got an emotion out of that, because to your point, Jeremy, when you said it's condensed, it's super condensed. And that's the biggest problem with the whole thing, is trying to squeeze in as much as you can. Like, someone was yelling at me on Facebook, some fan yesterday, like, how dare you try to do all this in 6 episodes? I'm like, what do you want me to do? Like, not do it. You know what I mean? Like, but at least it meant something to the story. Like he gets the matrix and he gives it, like, it's also serves purpose of the story as opposed to just replicating something that happened in the original Beast Wars series. So, this guy turns. We sort of did that with Jetfire, and Jetfire and Dinobot have very similar arcs in it, and that was intentional to sort of bookend it, that way with these characters.
Yeah, and I think with Dinobot in particular, since in the original show he defected to the Maximals very early on, but in this he never did. I like that you have that bit with him and Optimus Primal, and he's like, I thought about defecting so many times. Would you have accepted me? And Primal's like, yeah, but you would have made a crappy Maximal. I thought that was just a great line. Yeah,
I mean, like I said, Tim and May brought real personality to those characters in this, and that was a real pleasant surprise for me personally. As I'm a man of a certain age, as you can tell with all this gray. And I have contemporaries, friends who, like me, grew up at the dawn of Transformers, who will say, I don't really care about the Beast Wars characters. I don't give a shit about the Beast Wars characters. Like, and then you've got, Matt's generation, who entry point is entirely Beast Wars. Like, I love Beast Wars. Oh my God, we're going to see these characters for the first time in, 25 years and all this shit. And the idea was, how do you honor Matt's generation and then convince the old fogies that I roll with the viability of these characters in a sort of combined mixed universe of Transformers, and how to make them make sense in not necessarily G1, but in the War for Cybertron continuity, which I guess is its own continuity. And that's why we, that was the other big twist, is leaving them all together at the end in two different, factions. They're not necessarily Autobots or Decepticons anymore, or Maximals, Predacon. It's just these guys and these guys. That was the fun with Black Arachnia, also sort of playing every side and all that shit.
First off, don't listen to just weirdo random fans on Facebook.
The problem is, the problem is, with
everyone's going to be a critic.
Yeah, look, everybody's a critic. And I learned on this one not to go to the message boards as much, because, it's like, people sitting there like, oh, I hope FJ DeSanto never works again and all that shit. It's like, I get it. You know what I mean? Like, I get people have a sense of ownership on these things. And
you read my comment.
But that was yeah. You just did it like, instead of, Daryl with one R, like,
yeah.
But
that's my alias.
Yeah, exactly. Very creative. But you realize that you have a responsibility when we make these things, and everybody knows this, of we're all fans of it. We all have our iteration of it, whether it's Beast Wars, whether it's G1, 86 movie, like the later shows, etc. Everybody has their own connective moment to it and their own interpretation of what it should be, and right. So, the majority of the hate messages I get on Instagram and Facebook in particular are all from that basis of this, of what their Transformers is. And so there's no right or wrong to that. You know what I mean? Like I'm a DC, I'm sure I talked about this before, but I'm a DC Comics fanatic, and I don't like any of the recent movies, right? Like all the Snyder stuff. But there's a part of me that sits there and knows, like, okay, I don't like this. Something else will come along that I'll like eventually with these characters down the line. Like, none of these things are going away, but it's speaking to somebody somewhere, because, our show has done really well, so it's speaking to somebody. And I'd like to think there's a generation that this is being introduced to, of Transformers that, are this is their jumping on point, or this is their thing. Because it's interesting, if you like, if you look at the comments on like a non-fan specific page, like Netflix's YouTube, the majority of the comments for a trailer will be very, very positive. If it's on, I'm not going to name some of your rival fan podcasts, you know, there are people, podcasters and, you know, fan sites that, I'm going to sound like I'm a dick, but who think if they speak authoritatively enough, they know how this works. You know what I mean? Like they know, like, well, obviously they didn't have enough money to do this, or obviously they did this. It's like, no, dude, you weren't there. You don't know what we did, right?
So, that's the secret in podcasting. We talk as if we, you know.
But you guys don't do that because I listen to you guys. You guys are very clear that it's your opinion versus, right. Fuck you, FJ. This is, you know, like a disaster, right? So you guys can look at it objectively versus, you know, and by the way, that's big business. I'm sure, you know, these YouTube channels, that's big business. They don't want to see, like, nobody goes on the YouTube thing to hear good things. They want to, oh yeah, I agree with that motherfucker. You know, like that guy, you know, voices, and, oh, you know, like, and, you know, we get used to it at a certain point, but then also when you're working with giant corporations like Hasbro and Netflix, they can sit there and say, guess who watched this show? You know, and it's not 90% of the people who watch the show aren't going to those, you know, aren't going to be on those YouTube channels. You know what I mean? The diehards are always going to watch it and go on to the next thing. And, you know, whoever does something after this, they'll hate that and love this. You know what I mean? That's what we learned. Like when Siege came out, it's the majority of the fan base goes, oh, it's a disaster. We hate it. Then Earthrise comes out and goes, well, I like Siege better. And then, you know, Kingdom will come out and go, well, I liked Earthrise better. And then, you know, years from now, another show will come out with somebody else and they'll go, oh, it's not as good as War for Cybertron. You know, like that's just the way it works. And I'm guilty of it too. Like I'm that fan also with certain things. So you get sort of used to it.
I mean, you can look at how the Star Wars prequels are now a lot more loved than they were when they first came out.
See, Matt, I told you. I told you that. Because that's the thing. The sequels make the prequels now. And also because it's a generational thing. So, like, for example, again, being a man of a certain age, I can remember a world without Star Wars, right? Very, very briefly, by the way. I'm not that old. But the thing is, I had the experience of those original 3 movies, right? So, again, guys my age who don't give a shit about Beast Wars, right? They're sitting there going, well, I hate the prequels. Now, I'm different. I'm the type, like I was mentioning before, like, I don't think the prequels are great movies, but I like learning more about a world that I'm obsessed with, right? Like, I'm more interested, like, oh, so this is what happened. Like, to me, that's folklore. It's legend and all that stuff, right? The sequels, I won't get into the sequels, but the thing is, I have a nephew who, you know, has spent a lot of time with me over the years. He's 22 now, and he had his early movie-going experience was seeing the second and third prequel movies, right? He was too young for the first one, but now has a sort of romantic view of 6 movies versus us who grew up with 3, you know, and we're adults when the prequels come out. So you have to imagine now they're sitting there going, we love the prequels, you know, and maybe that'll be War for Cybertron. I mean, the thing is, like, you have people going to sit there, Transformers Prime was better. You know, that's their Transformers. The animated is their Transformers. Robots in Disguise is their Transformers. There's different, it's like Batman at this point. You know, everybody's got different Batman. And there's no right or wrong version of it. There's no bad version of Transformers. You know, that even if you don't like something, you know, it's today's modern Transformers is tomorrow's somebody's romantic nostalgic view, like my nephew. You know, somebody's watching with their kids now. But the point being is I take great pride in that, and we're cognizant of that, meaning we have to create a show that's an open door for anybody to watch all 3 of these. You know, we don't want to be so insular that it's the 6 of us are the only ones who are going to get all these inside jokes and stuff. The idea is, you know, like you were talking, I think it was Jeremy was saying before, that the little comment about we had 200, you know, Maximals, and, you know, you see the sparks later and all that stuff. You know, that's cool if you know Beast Wars, but it's fine if you don't, because you understand the stakes and what these characters have gone through to get to this point.
Speaking of having like this series be the first entry for people into Transformers, with like G1 and stuff, like all like the epic moments, like Prime dying in the movie and all that. Like what are the epic moments that you want? Like if this was some kid's like first entry into Transformers, what are those epic moments that you really want them to remember? Like what are the ones that not even just in Kingdom, but it's over the whole series? Like what are the ones that really stand out for you?
Matt, you name a few and then I'll hop in.
That's a great question.
It's a super question.
I mean, it's so tough to answer too, because like it's hard to speak for what speaks to other people. I think me personally, there's a couple moments that I'm hoping land as well as they do for me. And Dinobot's death, I think, came out great.
It's a big one.
I hope that is a moment that sticks with new fans as much as it did for me, watching the original Beast Wars. I think in Siege, Ultra Magnus's death is a big moment, and just especially because of the established history with Megatron and stuff like that. Like to me, that was always meant to be a really impactful moment. And then sort of Jetfire's turn too.
That's what I was going to say as well. The Jetfire's arc, and that was really good.
Yeah, I have a real soft spot for Jetfire's arc. I love complex and characters that feel that tug of both sides. Like those are always my favorite characters in every media. So like for me, watching Jetfire's whole arc throughout Siege and Earthrise, I just absolutely love it. So hopefully that sticks with people as well.
Yeah, I think. Look, I can think of one moment. There are things when you create these things where you think, oh my God, they're going to go crazy for this. And then it's like, well, they didn't go crazy for that, but they went crazy for this other thing that you didn't realize you were going to do. For me, the big moment was Alita at the end of the third one, when she comes down and calls them Orion Pax and all that stuff. Like I personally take a lot of great pride in that character, Alita, because we sat there very early on and really wanted a strong female character in the series because we felt it needed that. It's 2021. We want a badass female Transformer. But, Windblade had been done. We did Windblade in the other one and all that stuff, like something that was a little fresher and had a personal connection to the characters, especially when Megatron calls her Ariel in the second season and all that stuff. Like, so to me, that stuff is very important. I'm a big fan of Alpha Trion in this. That we, I wish they made a freaking toy out of, but the, sort of his impact on it. But that's not necessarily a moment. Like, I think an impactful moment for me is a lot of the Dead Universe episode because that's where we learn all this cool stuff, like Megatron in the gladiatorial pits. I just think that's a beautiful sequence, and we learn a lot about where his angst comes from. The murder of Ultra Magnus, I think, is super cool. There's also a bit in the third season where they're in the Temple of the Allspark, Prime and Primal, and it's all the sparks, and they go to the they see the sparks of all the dead Maximals and Predacons, and Primal just sort of quietly says "maximize." Like to me, it's like the emotional beats are more interesting to me than it's a big moment which we planned from the start, which is no surprise, that I just think is fun and iconic, is Omega Supreme in the first season just coming out of nowhere. You know what I mean? Like, I just love that from a nerdy toy point of view. And it's and again, my personal thing, which I do on every podcast because Daryl ruined it in the first thing, is the Mercenaries. Like things I'm personally proud of that we added to the canon versus, like the Mercenaries, Alita, things we were able to bring to it. Even the ArcBot in this, like, that we knew we were doing from the beginning, and to have the opportunity to add new things to the world. What, Jeremy?
Yeah, I got to tell you, when in episode 5, when the Ark was referred to as Teletran, I literally screamed. I have been calling for that. Like, that's going to be the character's name, and then they call it the Ark on the toy. So thank you so much for naming him Teletran.
Well, now I can tell them the things I told you,
Yeah.
top secret. But the ArcBot was always planned from the beginning. That they like in the very first meeting, it was like 3 years ago. Somebody showed a sketch of the ArcBot, not what it eventually, like an early version of it. And we were just like, okay, cool, we're going to do something with that. And we sort of knew it's going to show up in the third season. That was all we knew. And there's a cool concept, I don't know if it's public yet, of like the ArcBot stopping the Nemesis, like the original sort of concept painting and stuff. And what was really cool about it was, unlike almost everything else, the toy wasn't fully developed yet. So what was cool was, as we were going and getting ready for that, they kept updating us on the design of it. But then also, we were working with the team in Japan to design it and adding things to it. So it's initially based on our arc, meaning our design for the arc, because we didn't have CAD data like we had the figures. So like that initial arc that you see in all three was designed by our team in Japan based on the original model sheets from the 80s and stuff like that. And we added a bunch of things. So their reference point for building the toy arc was our design. So this is just a cool nerdy sort of thing that and the only moment this sort of happened. So the thing is, once they sort of got into it with Takara Tomy, was, it's easy to draw something, but then they have to figure out how it actually works, how it actually transforms and all that stuff. So the design would slightly change. But the cool thing is, we would, as that was going, sort of, whether it's a color scheme or a panel here or there, we had really good lines of communication with them. We'd hand that over, then they'd send something back. So by the time you see them in the thing, it's super, super close to the toy. And the only instance this ever happened was, I got a call. This was 7, 8 months ago. No, it's more than that. It's about a year ago. I got a call from Hasbro. Can you hop on a Zoom? And they didn't tell me why. I'm like, oh, they're probably firing me. But we got on, and it was Montana wanted me to see the box art for it. Does anybody have it? Do you guys have it yet? It's not.
It's not out yet. It's not out yet.
So when you look at the box art of it, it's got stuff from the show in it. It's got Black Arachne and Air Razor and all these little things that they were taking from the scripts, or they didn't have the animatics, but they were taking from the script and things I was showing them because I'm always updating them. So it was like the first time they were like, hey, look at this toy box and give us your thoughts on it. Right? So I don't know if you've seen the toy box, but it's pretty much, what it is, except they originally had Optimus's hand with the Allspark in the front. And I was like, guys, no, because you're going to see this like months before the show comes out. So if you actually look at the toy box, you'll see the glow of the Allspark in the bottom right panel. But it's literally to the show. And it was like the coolest, like literally meeting the artist who draws these things was super awesome. And that was my only comment. Like, it's like, dude, it's awesome. And, they sort of explained, like, we have to show both versions of the toy on the front and all that stuff. And, we just want to make sure this doesn't, and Megatron, I think Megatron's in his hand and all that stuff. And they're like, is that a spoiler? I was like, no, you did that with the Scorponok box anyway. All these Titans end up grabbing Megatron anyway. So, it's like, just do it. But that was a cool thing to sort of introduce into the show and sort of, and to Jeremy, to your thing, we had to come up with a reason for it. So the reason we came up pretty early on was the Allspark gets on the ship and will be the, power him to whatever. I don't even know if it's clear enough, but the idea was like, it's the Allspark, it's that gives him the ability to transform, because you're going to sit there and be like, well, why didn't this thing just transform every season? They're in trouble. Like, why did it transform on Char and beat up the Quintesson?
You did make that clear in the dialogue, and like there is a line where they say, I think like the data they downloaded from the dead universe was what helped Teletran reconfigure the arc, and then he wasn't able to transform until he got the power boost from the Allspark. So that was all made clear.
Yeah, you see the bottom right. That's the power of the Allspark. Yeah. That bluish thing. They just moved it off panel. It's super cool. Look how talented they are with these designs. It's just great.
Yeah.
Yeah, their box art has really been good the last few years.
Yeah, look, I'm sure if I get this much abuse from fans, they probably get tons of abuse, but they really care. They really, I sound like a corporate man when I say that, even though I don't work for them, but like having worked with them now for 5 years on the 2 shows and sort of watched them sort of evolve into, especially War for Cybertron, sort of figuring out that sweet spot of what the fans want, et cetera, and getting to meet the Takara Tomy guys when I was in Japan, which was, a thrill. It's not an easy job with these guys too. So, for them to be able to pull these things off is phenomenal.
Yeah. So was there anything, can you tell us anything that got left on the cutting room floor that you wish had made it into the show?
Matt, what am I allowed to say? Not allowed to say.
It's a good question. Very good question.
You can say whatever you want, FJ.
I'm letting Matt figure this one out.
We didn't cut much. Like once we had the scripts written, we, knew exactly what we were, trying to accomplish and how we were going to execute on it. There's obviously ideas that get thrown around in the writer's room that, some of them we just can't accomplish for production reasons. Some of them are just too outlandish. Some ideas that we would explore, just didn't work story-wise. So I'm trying to think of like something specific.
Was there ever a plan to transform Unicron?
No, Unicron wasn't, to be honest, originally going to be in it at all. And we were just lucky that we had seen they were doing the HasLab thing. Like we saw the HasLab thing years ago, like the prototypes and they brought me to some secret, no, I'm not joking. They brought me to some room where someone had to like borrow a key card to get into, like someone high up in the brand, like couldn't even get in, and I'm looking around because there's like Star Wars toys. It's like all the top secret shit. And it's like, trying to behave. Right. And we saw the prototype and what we always, I guess, I don't remember. We'd have to talk to Gavin because he wrote the Dead Universe episode. But the idea was always like with Galvatron showing, we always knew Galvatron was going to show up and we were always going to have the voiceover of Unicron. But I think when we saw and the idea was that was just going to be a moment. And then the fan service of it was just going to be the voice. But then when they said we have the CAD data of Unicron of this thing, we knew we could do it. But the problem is if you transform them into the bot, then you got to do something with them, right? And look, again, this is the abuse I get, on Facebook and things like that is we only have X amount of episodes. So if I'm doing a season where you got to introduce how many Beast Wars characters, have them make sense, have Galvatron and Nemesis make sense, while finishing the Optimus, Megatron, Autobot, Decepticon story you've told in Siege and Earthrise, where do you put Unicron? Like, the problem is, where are you going to put him? There's no logic. Like, without unraveling the story, you'd have to throw the Beast Wars story out if you want Unicron in there because you got to give him enough time to exist. That's somebody else's story down the line. I will tell you this: there was an attempt to try and do the Earth modes in Kingdom, and there's a bit we had to cut because the problem became, again, this is way out of school shit, but Hasbro has to sell these toys, right? But luckily, they never force anything on us. They never there's only one thing Hasbro ever asked in that entire show. 2 things. One, I'm not going to tell you about, but the other one was you got to have could you have Dead Optimus in there somewhere? Because we're going to do a toy of Dead Optimus. And I went, okay. And that's why in the Dead Universe, you see Dead Optimus, the 86 movie Dead Optimus. It ended up working perfectly. And even though it's called something else because
alternate universe
you
Optimus
know why?
Prime.
They're going to kill me for this. Is they can't call it Dead Universe, something dead in it, a toy that says dead in it, and sell it on Amazon because it's an Amazon exclusive. Amazon wouldn't let them. So then they were calling Dark Universe, and they were like, no, the Universal thing with all the monsters is called Dark Universe. That's the true story. So the problem was, hey, in Kingdom, we're going to do the Earth modes of the classic G1 characters. And as you guys have heard me complain over the last year, is we only have X amount of character models, X amount of characters we can do, right? But story reason, we couldn't figure out if they were going from the Dead Universe in Earthrise, coming out of that and coming to Earth. We don't have time to take them to an Earth where they can scan Earth modes and then somehow end up in Beast Wars. Right? Like it doesn't make sense. It doesn't chronologically, it doesn't make sense. So we came up with a sort of workaround that, and you can see a little bit in this is a big sort of Easter egg, is in the beginning of the first episode. Matt, jump in if I'm messing this up. Prime is injured and he's sparking and all that stuff, when he's fighting Primal, and then he sort of faints and all that stuff. The original idea was that the Beast Wars characters would say, we have the technology to help him, to fix him. And they inadvertently upgrade him into the Earth mode. So the original idea was when he wakes up from the bed, he would be in the Earth mode. And they would sort of be like, because they came from the future, we have his schematics of what he is later. So actually, when you look at the computer, there's Matt, where's the computer where it actually says 1984?
Yeah, it's in the med bay on the Ark.
Yeah, like if you look in the med bay on the Ark, at one point it says 1984, and it's actually like flickering stuff of like the history of Transformers, like really brief. But I think we even got as far as the animatic stage, and there was going to be a bit where when Prime shows up into action later, RC goes, "What did she say? Like new look, something?" And he was like, "I can't explain it." And then it was just like, "This doesn't work." Like it was square peg in a round hole, whatever the phrase is. It just didn't work, and it really. Then the question becomes: if you're doing this guy, you don't have it for Megatron, you don't have it for Stars, the Seekers and all that stuff, and and we couldn't sit there and justify an excuse when you only have 6 episodes that there'd be an episode where somehow they land in Portland, Oregon, 1984, and then go through a portal somewhere and they're in Beast Wars. It's like if I told my studio in Japan, we got to build Portland, Oregon, 1984, they'd be like, they'd kill me. You know what I mean? Like they'd never speak to me again. And so that was one thing that ended up on the cutting room floor. I thought of one more thing that we cut too. What?
This one's going to pain you too.
Oh.
So originally, we were supposed to have Double Dealer's alt mode in Earthrise. We had planned on that the entire time, and I'm sure I'm going to get some hate from this, but I always thought Double Dealer's alt mode was just a little bit silly. And so like I would tease FJ about it. I'd be like, oh yeah, we got to make sure that the bird gets in there. And for whatever reason, like as we were writing those scripts, there was just never a moment where it made sense for him to transform. And like, we tried to put it in a couple places and it just didn't make sense. And so eventually FJ broke down. He's like, all right, we won't do it. We can. And then we reallocated that asset to one of the Beast Wars characters to make sure they had their alt mode, which I think ended up.
That was the other problem
off.
is we originally had less Beast Wars modes. And then we realized at a certain point, if you don't see all these guys, except maybe Scorponok doesn't transform, we're going to get killed. Like it's stupid. Like, like I even had to sort of with Netflix in the trailer where you see them transform. That wasn't originally in the trailer. And I was like, that's your money, is to show the Beast Wars characters transforming. And especially when we started to see Polygon's test of the beast modes, where they look like beasts and they would look like fluid animals. And we were like, holy shit, like this is great. Like they did such a killer job with it. But yeah, like everybody complains this one didn't transform in Siege, this one didn't. The idea is if they did, then you're not getting Beast Wars. You know what I mean? Like it sounds like everybody's cheap and whatever. It's not. It's being realistic, because then if you go then nobody will make the show if the budget's this. You know what I mean? And it's easy for, YouTube channel proto guy to tell you, I know what I'm doing. And it's like, no, you don't, because this is actually how these things really get made, and stop talking like you actually know. And you want Beast Wars. That's why there's less characters in Earthrise, because we were saving it up for Beast Wars or for Kingdom. And in retrospect, I'm glad we made that decision. That was the idea, was like, when you meet all those characters first, we see them all in beast mode. That was the fun part, like Cheetor coming, what the hell is that? Like if they showed up as robots first, the Autobots would sit there and be like, well, hey, who are those Transformers? Who are those guys? Whereas, everybody you see a rat, you see a rhino, all this cool stuff. Like, look, how do you not pay that off? And then how do you, especially Dinobot, like it's so awesome, those characters. I learned to really love the Beast Wars characters in this. Like, it made me look at it in a completely different way. The other thing from the cutting room floor that I can think of was the final scene of the whole series. We did probably, and you can ask Tim when you have him on, we probably did 4 different endings. And the only one I can tell you that I wanted to end on was with the mercenaries. And that got killed. That's the only, Hasbro, the entire show, never put their foot down until that ending. I was like, whoa, we were Sound Blaster this whole time. And of course, they were like, somehow he survived and here's where he is. And dun, dun, dun. And they were like, no. And we ended up landing on something cooler with Unicron and, Nemesis and Galvatron. Because it leaves it open-ended, and anybody can pick it up and go, or someone could do a comic someday about it.
Yeah, I was about to say, years from now, you can have someone do a Mercenaries comic that, kind of shows where Sound Blaster went off to.
Do you see Matt laughing? Do you see Matt laughing? Matt's laughing because
he's been talking about that for years
I've been trying
now.
to catch this for 2 years, the birth of the Mercenaries, and to deaf ears, basically. I've been pitching that to deaf ears.
So
speaking of the anime,
okay, go ahead, Mike.
Speaking of like the animation that you're talking about, like the fluidity of it, I guess I really do agree. I loved the Beast animation on this. I think I loved it like more than like anything that has like come before, like more than the Siege or more than Earthrise. Everything just felt it felt real. It felt believable. It felt like these are like actual animals. And yeah, I think it came out really, really well.
They rocked it. That's all polygon. And Beast Wars, especially in Japan, has a certain reverence because they did so many versions of it. Beast Wars 2, Beast Wars Neo, all that stuff, which I love. It's all batshit crazy. None of it makes sense, and it just looks great, right? But
was there any thought about bringing in like any of those characters for
because
Kingdom?
it's all everything we did is toy based, meaning we sort of early on. Matt probably has all this stuff somewhere. We sort of got an overview very early on of these are the characters that we're making toys of in the 3 waves, and or the 3 chapters, so to speak. So I know from their point of view, they wanted to stick with the classic characters, but the thing is, because we were so ahead of the toys. So like where we had the CAD data for the G1 for Earthrise and Siege, not for Kingdom. Kingdom's all built from model sheets that they look a little different than the toys. You'd see if you really look at them close, because the toys, we were ahead of the toys, so the toys weren't built yet. So some of them were a little more masterpiece oriented, but they all came from model sheets that Hasbro gave us that they were building off of. Some of that stuff gets released now, like the artist puts them out. But no, to answer your question, Mike, we stuck within the thing, and we had sort of a list of, you can kill these characters, these characters need to go on the Ark into Earthrise. These characters need to be in Kingdom. And then they change it and forget to tell us. You know what I mean? Like, be like, oh shit, wait a minute. So, we had an overview of, the problem with a show that's called War for Cybertron. If you don't front load it in the war chapter, which is Siege, with a lot of characters, even if they're small or big, then it doesn't feel like a war, right? So that's why we front loaded everything. So when we get to Earthrise and they go into space, we only really meet the, Double Dealer, and we meet Decius and the Skylinks and Scorponok were sort of the key characters in that, because we knew we were going to have so many characters at the end. So you have to be sort of judicious in how you lay those quote unquote assets out, and be smart about how you use the characters. Like when we built, and people get worked up about the redecos and all that stuff. It's like, that's a Transformers tradition. Like John Warden gave us a deck. There's this like awesome deck that is literally the history of Transformers redecos. So like when you see all the cogs and shit, like those colors are all specifically chosen by Hasbro, right? Like with the Rainmakers in there, we snuck them in, with the cone heads, which was a whole fight over that with Polygon to get them to add the cones on the head, or we'd be crucified by the fans to have Ramjet and Dirge and all that shit. And but literally we had a sort of guide of redeco. Who came out of that, Matt?
I'm trying to remember, because there's so many different redecos. I'm trying to think of like a specific one. I remember Bug Bite being a big one that came out of that deck.
We're like, we're gonna make him a mercenary. We're gonna make him, because that's the other story I can tell is Bumblebee wasn't originally in the show at all, because he wasn't part of the toy line. That's why he wasn't the main toy line. So originally there was no Bumblebee, and then I don't know if it had anything to do with the movie, because when we started the movie it wasn't out yet, and then eventually it was like, oh, can you sneak Bumblebee at the end of the first season? And it was like, okay, we can figure something out with Bumblebee. And then it was, hey, can you put Bumblebee in the show? And it was like, yeah, no problem. Like, he's cool.
And he's in the first scene.
Sorry?
He's in the first scene of the show.
Well, we got lucky that they sort of told us just before we started to get serious with it. And that's why we were able to, then George came up with the idea of, hey, we're going to open on Bumblebee and Wheeljack, as an homage to the original show. But that's also one of the reasons why Bumblebee doesn't transform, because they didn't know what he was going to transform into. You know what I mean? Like, and I didn't want a little UFO flying around. You know what I mean? Like, it's very tricky. You know what I mean? Like, how do you do that? So he's based on the Masterpiece, and then they eventually added him to the Netflix toy line. Like a lot of that toy line is sort of as we kept going. The Seekers are the big redeco. I'm not the Seekers. The Sparkless were the big redeco. Like, let's do zombies, and everybody thinks they're Terracons. They're not. The Sparkless are its own thing. But that was, sort of, Bumblebee wasn't originally going to be in it. And the other big thing, which, Matt, I think we've talked about this on other shows, was originally Ultra Magnus wasn't in that role of the guy who gets killed. It was originally going to be Alpha Trion. So originally everything you see Ultra Magnus doing was originally going to be Alpha Trion, who we knew from the beginning was going to be in it. But then the problem became, we got pretty far with the development of it. So the idea was already, I don't think he surrendered. I think he was already sort of captured by Megatron when we originally conceived it. And then he would eventually kill Alpha Trion. And that's where the idea of the protocols and all the shit came out of. And what happened was, we had a call with Hasbro, like everything with Hasbro. They eventually go, oh, wait a minute, over here we're doing this. And they're trying to do an aligned continuity, right? Which you guys all know about. So like Cyberverse was ahead of us with similar elements, the AltSpark going into the space bridge, right? All these things, they go to Earth and whatever. And so they said, oh shit, Alpha Trion technically in your continuity needs to be dead already. And we were like, oh shit, okay. Like we just developed this entire Bible with Alpha Trion. But because Alpha Trion was going to get killed in the first couple episodes, it wasn't something that had a huge domino effect on everything else. So, we had gotten a hold of the Cyberverse scripts, I think, for the first 2 seasons. And I went through them. I remember printing them out. It was like this much stuff. And just sort of wherever they mentioned the Allspark or Alpha Trion, it sort of went with a highlighter and sort of went through it and put a post-it so we had the reference to it. And plus having Gavin, and Gavin came in at some point, and he had come from Cyberverse, so he instinctively already knew what was going on in that show, so we could align the kind of. So, for example, I think originally we had toyed with the idea of Bumblebee being the one throwing the Allspark into the space bridge, and it was like, no, you can't do that. It's got key moments in the franchise now. They want to align, so it's like if this historic thing happens, it needs to be the same in everything. Okay, so Optimus has to be the one who throws the Allspark. That's sort of like
Nexus events.
Yeah, exactly. But that's sort of the idea in Kingdom, where B is the one with the Allspark. Like Nemesis goes after Prime, but B's the one running with the Allspark. That was sort of lifted from how we were going to end Siege. So the idea, the original ending of Siege, if we were going to go with this Bumblebee route, was the idea of everybody's chasing Prime and it's B who's got it. And it was sort of like the badass moment of just like they get Prime. Like, where is it? Rips him open and there's no Allspark. And you had B over here, like, and we couldn't do it. We couldn't do it. Yeah. And but then you'd have to figure out how he throws it. And it doesn't mean as much as Prime doing. So, it's like, sliding doors kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's Optimus's whole motivation, like essentially the downfall of Cybertron itself is because he did that.
Exactly. And those are the things you realize as you sort of write, like when we did the initial Bible, it was very heavy on Siege, mild on Earthrise, and very thin on Kingdom because we didn't sort of know where it was going. So, early on, and we knew the scripts would inform that. And to your point, if anybody else throws the Allspark into the space bridge, then it doesn't make sense. It's Prime's guilt, and it comes full circle when he sees Alita's body. You had to have, like I was saying earlier, you have to have the price of war. If you don't have that price of war and everybody comes back, then it's just a shitty cartoon versus, something with some stakes and some weight to it that informs the character. Look, I'm not an idiot. I know everybody's like, I don't like this version of Optimus. He's stupid, and everybody's smarter than him. It's like that was the whole point, was him learning those lessons throughout this. And I think we paid it off, especially with the Alita payoff at the end of the thing. That's what he becomes Optimus Prime.
I also, despite I think you put a lot, you gave all 3 series had a lot of weight, but they also had some humor elements in them as well. And I appreciated that. I wonder, how much did you have to convince Hasbro to let you actually use the word transform in Kingdom? Like I had the one part where the Maximals say maximize, and then I think it was Hound says, "Is that how they say transform?" And I was like, "Whoa, he said transform," because with the Hasbro guys, they're always saying convert. They say the toys convert. They don't transform; they convert. Yeah, and you got some. Oh well, that's great. That's great because that's a pet peeve of mine is that they in the cartoons and comics now, they don't let the Transformers say that they transform. They always convert or change or whatever. So
I don't know. I don't ask questions unless somebody yells at me. I don't ask questions because then you open the Pandora's box. And
best to just ask forgiveness later.
Mm-hmm.
And go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. What were you gonna say?
I did notice you added this is something. I mean, it's not a huge thing. It's kind of just a small little element, but I got the sense that Black Arachnia is we get a little bit of LGBT representation in Black Arachnia in the show. So 2 times we notice she's attracted to RC, and then she gives Air Razor a kiss. So I just thought that was a nice little addition added in there.
That's intentional. May brought that in. It was very important, and we got a lot of compliments from people at Hasbro about that. That they, and that was sort of. Look, I don't want to sound preachy about it, but it's 21st century. Let's if it gives depth to the characters in the story, let's do it. You know what I mean? Like, and Black Arachne was a lot of fun to watch the writers come up with that. They did such a good job with these characters, and I like Air Razor a lot. And again, you're talking to somebody who had no emotional attachment to those characters, and I sort of ended the process sort of being in love with all of them, and wanting those toys, like when they send those are the ones I'm not giving away, though I did give Matt my Beast Wars Megatron to go with his masterpiece.
Very nice to do.
But yeah, I'm glad you noticed that, because that was something we're really excited about.
And I was curious in like this section where they're all in the Allspark forest and having all their hallucinations. There's one point where Black Arachnia, I think she hallucinates a wolf, or she hears a wolf howling. Was that like a reference to Beast Wars Silverbolt?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I don't know if it was was it in the script, Matt?
Yeah, it's very intentional. That's supposed to be Silverbolt.
The thing is, we got really scared because in the animatic, the wolf face was very prominent, and I was just like, "Oh no!" They're like, "No, there's going to be text over it and all that stuff." I was like, "Okay," But that was all that is the Temple of the Allsparks defense mechanisms messing with everybody. I'm glad you caught that. I forgot all about that, to be honest with you.
That's why we pay them the big bucks.
Yeah, big zeros, giant zeros,
giant dollars.
One, I guess, a couple of characters, Beast Wars characters that I guess are relatively prominent, but were, I guess, missing, and maybe it was just a kind of a budget or a scheduling issue, but and maybe they, for the tone of the show, they might not have fit, was Waspinator and Tarantulas. I guess those two guys, that was the only in terms of prominent Beast Wars characters that I would have liked to have seen. They were missing, but was there any discussion?
Them, did they?
I mean, I don't know if I guess the new there's I don't think there's a Tarantulas. I think there's rumors of a Waspinator coming out, but
you see, that's my point. If they're not in the show, it's because they weren't going to make them as toys. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure if we insisted, hey, Waspinator needs to be in this, they wouldn't give us a hard time. But again, what is like, it's Waspinator's not.
He's comic relief.
Totally. That would have been a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
In my mind, they both died years ago.
There you go.
And they did stuff later. Like Hasbro ended up making things like the toys for the line, like the what are they called, the fossilizers and all that stuff. We didn't know anything about that stuff. In retrospect, I'm sort of glad we didn't, because we could focus on those core characters. The only Beast Wars character who sort of gets shortchanged is Scorponok. Like, he has that one fight and that's it.
But I think
really cool. There are multiple of him.
Yeah, because they told us that could be your sort of cog or seeker or whatever. That could be your sort of soldier thing.
Oh, okay.
And we needed something, like, they only pop up when Air Razor and Black Arachne are on the Nemesis trying to hack it. Like, that was, we needed something in that moment to increase the drama of it, and that's where they sort of came in. Just red shirts. That's really what they were.
I can't imagine.
A character we weren't using a lot, so I know they pop up in one of the trailers, and everybody was like, "What is that?" Like, you're so cheap. It's like, okay.
I can't imagine trying to like shoehorn in like all the fossilizers, just like a bunch of completely new characters into in a situation like this. I mean, at least with Cog in Siege, he's somewhat of an established character. You have an understanding of who he is, but with fossilizers, it's just like grabbing like 4 or 5 just brand new characters and brand new figures and brand new rigs and everything for your animation too. That's
Yeah, because we
That would
didn't
be
have the
tough.
CAD data, right? So to your point, Mike, that with Cog, we knew early on, hey, there'd be a character called Cog. We give him something to do. We give him a little mini arc and kill him off in Earthrise. But then also the double purpose of they had told us very early on, maybe in one of these decks, like those are the foot soldiers. Those are the foot, and you can color them in different things. So it serves a rich purpose to the story, meaning we have a character that we can give a little bit to, but then we can easily multiply that. And of course, from a Hasbro point of view, and I might have told this story already, is the fact that he becomes the shoulder guns, like he can, was Hasbro like, hey, that's a toy we're doing. And, and intentionally the moment in Siege where you see that, in the ambush scene in Siege, that's intentionally the first footage we always showed Hasbro and Takara Tomy, because then they saw that thing split and they go, that's the toy. They get very excited when it's the toy elements. And then they don't bother you about the story stuff.
Show them exactly what they're working on, and you can work on your own stuff. I get it.
Yeah,
I get you.
Exactly. But then they did certain things like that I wish they told me that we didn't know about. For example, what's his face? Spinister, right? That they did. What was the redecoed version of Spinister that they put out? Where he's like blue and all that shit, right? Like,
oh yeah, Rotor Storm.
Yeah, like if they had told us that, we would have put that's the kind of stuff. We would put a bunch of those guys in the background, right, and stuff like that. But there are things like they're making the toys. They're not thinking about us in Burbank and Tokyo working on the show. It's as good as the communication is. We don't have that luxury of like, oh, we're doing an exclusive of whatever the purple and orange version of RC is. Well, we would have killed her instead of Moonracer. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. Those are the kind of things where, we were almost, especially early on, very OCD about being as closely aligned with the toys as possible. I was on here rambling about it, I'm sure, last year. And then now it's like, okay, guy, take a breath. Like you've got these characters in here, take a breath. You got the Arcbot, that kind of thing.
So now that everything's wrapped up, I mean, you're at the finish line. Well, I mean, when this podcast goes up, you'll be at the finish line. What do you do? I mean, I know probably can't talk about details of any future projects, but what's next for you guys? Or I'm sure you're already working on different things.
Matt and I have another anime that's next year for Netflix, based on something that's not a toy. Then you'll see next year that Gavin worked on with us.
Original concept?
No, it's based on a very popular IP, but it's not a toy IP. That's all I can say. So that has kept us busy, and we'll see where all that goes. We've been on Transformers now for 6 years. Between Prime Wars and this, it's been a journey and a half. And War for Cybertron is the best experience of my career. What is that? No, it's not superhero. It's not superhero. It's not comic book. I can tell you that. I'll say it's video game related. That's all I'll say. But we're very lucky that we got to work on this, and we've had such a ball doing it. And Hasbro and Netflix and Rooster Teeth have been so supportive of us. And someday I'll write a book about it. The experience on it, because Prime Wars was such a weird experience that, I'm waiting for like the 10th anniversary of that someday to throw everybody under the bus with that show. Because I hate it. And
you're driving that bus right now.
Yeah, well, I'm sure I've told you guys some of it, but it's
Tell us how you really feel about it.
Yeah, no, someday I will. But what was, by the way, don't forget, Matt and I were the ones who cast Ron Perlman as Optimus Primal in Power of the Primes, and now he's going to do the character in the movie, which is hilarious to me because he was sort of very nonchalant about it when he worked for us. But the Prime Wars, which is a completely different animal, no pun intended, was really graduate school, like training school for Transformers. That's where we learned everything to do and not to do. By the time we got to War for Cybertron, and then we learned all new lessons on this that have been super valuable. But whether you like War for Cybertron or not, it's made by people who genuinely cared about wanting to make a great show, from here to Japan and everywhere in between, whether it's the writers, the actors, the production team, the gang in Japan. We've spent the last 3 or 4 years in particular being obsessed with this show and understanding the responsibility of what we had to deliver with this. And no show is perfect, but this is one to be really, really proud of. And it's one of those things, I say this on every podcast, that I am excited to someday be 80 years old at the Burbank Marriott at one of these cons, sort of throwing more people under the bus, but telling more of these stories about it, because we're super proud of it. And it's been a joy, and it's allowed us to be creative and play in a sandbox very few people get to do. And that's a real honor to do that. I hope that all makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, I have one kind of final question from me. When you finally do give that final turn in to Netflix and Hasbro, saying, basically this is the final thing, do you have kind of something that you do with each show, just kind of do you go out, celebrate? Do you have just kind of pass out? What do you do?
Well, the first season, the problem is the second and third seasons were done during COVID. So the first season, what we did was we were doing the post-production on the Paramount lot. And I was hoping to be the tradition was stealing one of the golf carts and driving around the lot on it. And there's somewhere on my Instagram from the first one. And we just drove all over the lot on the first one. And then we didn't get to do that on the second, third one. Though the tradition was I always took the voice team out when we wrapped on that to a Japanese shabu shabu place not far from where I am right now. But the thing is, Jeremy, it's like this show was really one giant 18 episode show, meaning there were no breaks. Like when we did Prime Wars was you finished the season and there was a gap, there was a break. How long that was, I don't know, because I got fired immediately after the first one and then got brought back in the middle of the second one. And that's where Matt and I took over. That's why the second season's so bad, because it was already in progress. And the third one is somewhat coherent. But that was because we had the gaps in between, or at least on the second and third one, to sit there and assess what people were commenting on, et cetera. I mean, this would be a very different show if we had that with this. We would have sat there and been like, oh my God, everybody's saying this, we got to change this, maybe overthink it. So there's something for me very pure about the 18 episode 3 arc thing. And, the big surprise to me is that people didn't like Earthrise as much as Siege. And I think some of that has to do with the fact, Matt, I haven't even told you this, and I was wrong about this, is if you look at Siege and Kingdom, they're sort of like mini movies, and Earthrise is a little more episode of the week kind of thing. It's like we go to Char, we go to Space Station, we go here, and all that stuff. And I think we were sort of hogtied a little bit on the second season because we, in our minds, had already set up, we're going to have a Quintesson and we're going to have Scorponok in the Space Station. We're going to have Skylinks in the Dead Universe. And we knew you couldn't do that as like a continuing narrative like you could Siege with Kingdom. And that's sort of my only sort of creative regret is, could we have done that a little, differently and made it flow better? I don't know where I was
I liked
going with that.
Earthrise better.
I'm sorry?
I liked Earthrise, actually the best out of all three.
There it goes. I mean, the thing is, the problem in this day and age, in COVID in particular, is you're suddenly not at the Comic-Cons and not at the shows where you can talk to people and sort of gauge who did what. You know what I mean? Like,
Well, you can always talk to me, FJ. You can always talk.
I will. I mean, it's like therapy. I'm going to charge you. You're going to charge by the hour. But we're super proud of it. We do. I wish I could have taken everybody out for a big dinner and done one of these things with the writers and all that stuff. And maybe I still will now the world's coming back a little bit. But like we would have had a big, we planned a big sort of rap party in Tokyo with the crew there, which I keep promising when I get back, I will do that. Because everybody worked so hard on this. It's a real labor of love. It's a real, very fortunate to be trusted with this. And it's one of those things where I think the further I get away from it, the better the memory of it will be, because I'm super proud of it.
Yeah. Well,
luckily you guys didn't kill me, so that's a good sign.
Speaking of the world opening up, we do know that conventions are happening later in the year and early next year. So there's going to be a TFCon Baltimore and a TFCon LA early next year. Any chance we might see you guys there?
If someone calls me, as you can see, I can talk about it. So if people call me, I'm always happy to talk about it. If people want to talk about the show, I'm always happy to go to these things. Mm-hmm. As long as Matt's there to protect me.
Is it at the Burbank Marriott?
If it's the Burbank Marriott, then I'm there in the second.
I'll be there in a heartbeat.
Because the big secret is that the reason we always mention the Burbank Marriott is, and if I've told this story, I apologize to your audience, is our office is connected to the Burbank Marriott.
Oh.
It's in the same complex as Hasbro Studios. So we spent a lot of time in the last, pre-COVID year. We eventually moved into that space, that campus. And the sort of perk of it was you got your key card to get you through a gate that led you to the Burbank Marriott, right? So like, and we'd go to the pool and have a drink after work with the Rooster Teeth team and all that stuff and the other producers on the show. So, or the writers, depending on who was there. And, then there were always like these different, like weirdo conventions going on. Like there was like the sex toy convention. I'm not joking, Matt, remember?
He's not joking.
I'm not joking. It was like, and the thing is, because we're coming in through this gate, like you're in the back part of it where like all the exhibits are being shipped in, and it's like, all these crazy things, like, which I don't want to repeat, but you're sitting there going, okay, let's just go to the pool. And it's like all the people who sell sex toys are at the, Burbank Marriott pool thing. So I'm like, I just wanted a TF con, which I don't, I'm sure now it's over, I'm probably allowed to go, but,
TF con, March 11th through 13th. That's the Burbank Marriott.
Well, maybe I'll still be in the office then. Matt's already out. So maybe COVID, we're not allowed back in the office yet. So by the time I get back to the office, they're going to kick me out because the show is done. But, I will, that's my dream, is to be the old man at the Burbank Marriott, like that. I'm hoping history, is kind to the show and they go, oh, War for Cybertron was great. That's what I think is going to happen when the live action feature comes out with the Beast. And then they sit there and go, oh, War for Kingdom was so much better. Kingdom was the way to do it. You know what I mean? Like that's what he wasn't so bad after all. That's my own guilt,
We'll put you in touch with the guy who organizes it. We interviewed him on Sunday.
Oh, cool. Yeah, no, we're happy to always talk about the show because we're so proud of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys pulled off a really a great feat here, and the year of the 35th anniversary of the 86 movie, the 25th anniversary of Beast Wars. I think you did something that is an homage to both satisfies both sets of fans. So I think you guys should be proud of what you produce here. So thanks for adding to giving us another great Transformer story added to the canon, added to the multiverse, and we'll keep rolling those stories on. So thanks.
Well, no, we appreciate you guys always letting us come on. And, this is, like I said, this is therapy for me, in particular, and we appreciate anybody who watches it and gives it a chance, even if you like it or don't like it, it's looking at it with an open mind and sort of understanding where, the beauty of getting to talk to you guys is having the opportunity to sort of express the motivations and the intentions of the show and the love we have for the franchise. It's something we take and took very seriously throughout the entire process. And I am semi-relieved that this conversation wasn't you guys going, well, we didn't understand this, and this didn't make sense with the Beast Wars characters and all that shit. And, because that was a big concern, is a lot of work went into Kingdom, and all credit to May and Tim, who really locked themselves up, and, there was a lot, it's like, as a showrunner, my job is to sit there and half the skill set is knowing when somebody's better at you than something. That's why Matt and I get along, because he can run a show like nobody's business, and I'm the one running around going, I want mercenaries, and he goes, shut up, worry about this. Yeah, exactly. And May and Tim on this one took what we wanted to do and figured out a way to deliver it on a very high level that I think pays off the series. And what Charles was saying, the you caught the homages to 86 and G1 and Beast Wars, and that was always our thing, was how to respect that, and hopefully our legacy with this show is, 3 seasons of something that honored the show and was a love letter to the show or the franchise, and didn't screw up too much, and ruin people's childhoods and things like that.
Well, yeah, I don't think you ruined anyone's childhood. So,
well,
Some would argue.
All right. Well, I think we'll end things there. Thank you again to FJ DeSanto and Matt Murray for coming on. This is the Transmissions podcast. If you like Transformers, want to hear us talk about Transformers, you can go to our website, transmissionspodcast.com. We do 2 shows every week, one all about Transformers toys and merchandise, and one all about Transformers comics and media. So we love talking Transformers, and if you're interested, check us out. Put us in your podcast app, and we've got over 400 episodes to listen to. So start from episode 1 and enjoy.
You'll be here a while.
It's great to paint a house too.
And go if you've watched this and you haven't watched War for Cybertron on Netflix, go check it out. It's still great, even if we spoiled all the details for you. Go check it out, and let FJ and Matt know what you thought of the series. And
only if you liked it.
All right, thanks everyone for watching and listening, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Later.